Hello and welcome to another episode of the Biz Coach Show. And we're hanging out with Eric T. Whitmoyer, founder and CEO of My Biz Coaches. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, David, and yourself?
You know what? I'm doing awesome. Thank you for asking. And if you are new to the show, we talk about all things business, but specifically we focus on business coaching. And that also includes professionals that serve small businesses and just kind of things that they can use to help guide and assist small business owners. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss future episodes where we talk about interesting topics, just like today's topic, which is all around kind of misconceptions and maybe some of the pitfalls associated with mergers and acquisitions. And so, Eric, I think we should probably just dive right in and maybe start with some of the biggest misconceptions that you see as you're working with either clients or maybe even coaches that are helping clients going through that M&A process, or think that, hey, that's one of the fastest ways to grow. I should just go acquire somebody else. What are some of the misconceptions that you see?
Yeah. As it relates to misconceptions, I would say one of the first things is, it can be an easy path to acquisition, to growth, right? So whether you're looking to get into a business quickly or you're looking to scale quickly, acquisition can certainly be an opportunity. Can be. The challenge would be and I remind people of this when we have this conversation. Remember that when you're buying somebody else's business, you're also buying the associated problems with that business.
Very true.
And often, right? Often it's it's not always thought from that perspective. You're like, well, I'm buying an existing business that's already got cash flow, which is a great reason to buy it. And I'm a big proponent of buying an existing business. You just need to make sure that you have a good due diligence process and that you probably have somebody on your team through the due diligence process and through the acquisition process that can help you circumvent some of these potential missed opportunities. Because if you haven't done it before, you're likely to make mistakes. I know I did each time that I acquired, and it was different things each time. Yeah. but they're different things each time.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, some of the other misconceptions, certainly, it is a fast path, but it can be disruptive. There's also that it could be super expensive. Like, for instance, people are like, I'll just buy a cheap business. Either, I'll buy a smaller business so it'll be inexpensive. Well, it can be inexpensive, but it's also the same analogy of the whole 10x strategy, right? If you're going to do something, go at 10x, not 1x. And the purpose behind that is it takes as much energy to buy a business that's worth that for $3 million that's throwing off $500,000 in annual profits as it does to buy a business that does $500,000 in revenue and throws off $100,000 a year in annual profits. The difference being, if you buy a business for $500,000 and you finance it over probably 5 or maybe 7 years on $100,000, you don't have an income to live off of unless you're comfortable living on about $3,000 a month.
Yeah.
Whereas you buy a $3 million business with $500,000 plus in profit, you can absorb that debt and still have a 6-figure income, likely a $150,000, $200,000 income, depending on the scenario. And you likely are buying it with employees and systems and processes and everything else that you would want. And that's actually the better deal. A lot of people think, well, I'm getting a good deal because I'm buying it cheap. Well, buying it cheap has its drawbacks. Yeah. So there's certainly something to be said for that as well. Now, if you're an existing business already in the space and you acquire it at cheap, that's not so bad, because then you're just evolving. You're just, bringing it into your fold. But you'd have to be in that position to be really kind of capitalize on it.
Yeah, and I imagine that's probably one of the hardest things that you have to coach a client on relative to M&A is, something that looks like a great deal, seems like a shortcut, but really when you look at it and you dig into it, maybe it's better to grow organically or not spread yourself too thin, right? All the dangers that come with it. And that can be hard, I'm sure, to navigate that with a client.
Yeah. And I think that, if somebody is in the space, like currently, like they've worked in the space for years and they go to buy a business in that space, they're like, oh, if I buy it cheap, I know how to do this and I know how to do that and I can turn it up. And yes, you can, but unless you're sitting on a boatload of cash that you can dump into the business, because the reason it was struggling was because it was probably cash poor to begin with.
Yeah.
We talk about cash flow challenges on this channel all the time. And one of the things that I think people, especially if you've not owned your own business before, right? That's a huge misunderstanding, is that profits and cash flow are two different things as well, right?
Right.
I can have a lot of profits on my AR, but if that money's not coming through and hitting the bank account in a timely manner, and I don't have cash that I'm sitting on to inject into the business to increase my marketing spend or buy new equipment or maybe draw a salary, that all of these things could be considerations that as a person buying a business for the first time doesn't understand. You don't want to buy a cheap business unless you really know what you're getting yourself into.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we think about this from kind of the coach's perspective, what are some specific things that a coach can do to help their clients navigate some of these M&A decisions?
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, from as a coach perspective, I think the key is as I just mentioned, is helping that client identify those things in advance. Because even though we have coaches in My Biz Coaches, we have coaches that actually have acquired businesses before, and they're familiar with that. At least some of them have, and so they're familiar with some of those drawbacks and some of those myths or disappointing scenarios that tend to play out when you go through this process. And uh, even knowing that, getting the potential purchaser to conveying that in a way that they actually embrace and understand it and hear what you're saying, because again, the biggest problem that I think that the coach is going to have is getting the client to understand that where the hurdles that they're going to likely go through.
Right.
Because again, I literally came from a conversation today with somebody, and it's like, I know it sounds like it would be a better deal just to buy that couple $100,000 business because it seems manageable, right? It doesn't sound like it's so obtrusive. But that other business, it's at $1.5 million and throwing off $400,000 a year. That seems a little overwhelming. But I'd rather have overwhelming and access to capital, right? And I think that the hard part is the coach has got to convey that in a way to the client to really get the client out of that mentality of and it reminds me, it's a great point in Warren Buffett in his autobiography. One of the things I really remember specifically, part of the reason why Berkshire Hathaway is called Berkshire Hathaway, one of Warren's biggest disappointments was some kind of factory that he bought in the East Coast. I can't remember. Textile. It was a textile mill. And it was called Berkshire Hathaway, which is why he called the company Berkshire Hathaway, to remind him of the mistake he made. And the mistake that he specifically made in that scenario was he bought a cheap business cheap, and he ended up, and he couldn't turn the corner, and there wasn't enough profits to kind of pull from the business and do what he'd normally do. So they ended up having to shut the operation down. And so he actually built his business around that name so he'd never forget that lesson.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
So, but I think that's as you asked that question about coaches, I think that's the coach's biggest challenge. I think the other thing would be is if you're a coach and you're going to coach somebody through the process of an acquisition or a sale for that matter, one of the things you want to remember if you're on the other side of that is that it's a very emotional process.
Yeah.
And for the coach specifically, helping identify the emotional hurdles that will likely come up through that process. There's going to be, hey, this is going to happen, and then it's going to be, oh no, it's not. Right? It's just the entrepreneur's journey just never seems to end. Right? There's always these constant super highs and super lows, and the coach has got to be the one that can really kind of hold the middle ground throughout that whole process and not get emotionally attached. I mean, that's why somebody would want to work with a coach through that process to really kind of help them manage that. Because you would think the broker is going to help you play that role, right? Play that role for you. But the broker's got a vested interest in this business selling too. So
right.
If at the end of the day, ultimately you want somebody who's a little less emotionally tied to the whole scenario.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, reassuring to know that somebody like Warren Buffett can still make mistakes on this stuff too. So shows that there's a lot of ways that maybe a deal can go wrong, which makes me think about, you've touched on a couple already, but what are some of the other challenges that you've seen or experienced kind of as you've worked with clients, maybe been personally gone through some of these M&A scenarios?
First, okay, so there's 2 or 3 that really stick out right off the top of my head. So first one is financial analysis. Don't go cheap. Spend the money. Get somebody to come in and do it. If you're not good with books, don't think that you can analyze somebody else's books. And sure as heck, don't think that you can analyze somebody else's books who's likely not good at doing their books.
Yeah. Or trying to hide something.
Yeah. Well, especially if they're creatively trying to hide something. You definitely want somebody who understands that process and knows knows how to look for the landmines, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because whether they're creatively trying to hide them, or they're blatantly trying to hide them, or they're just incompetent in hiding it. Right? It's like, but in any scenario, I guarantee you there's going to be inconsistencies. And if you don't know how to uncover those inconsistencies, you're going to get burned.
Yeah.
Another big one is alignment in when you're acquiring a business that's got employees, alignment in mission, vision, values, right? We talk about that culturally. Is there a commitment and alignment? I'm the new owner. Let me stay to this course, and then I'll jump because I got another one that just hit me. But I'm the new owner, and there may be I want to run things a little differently. You're going to hear a lot of, well, this is how we've done it. Right. And so you're going to have that cultural bias to what it was, especially if people there for any length of time. So that's a challenge you need to be prepared for as somebody buying a business, regardless of whether you're buying new or using an opportunity to expand. Either way, you're going to run into that. So you need to be prepared for that. The other one that I was just thinking of was as it aligns with taking over a business. Actually, there's a natural tendency when you buy a new business or buy a business that's existing is to want to go in and fix it right away.
Yeah.
I would challenge you and say that's not the best course of action. I would say buy yourself some time, allow yourself 90 to 180 days to allow things to continue to operate the way they were. And this kind of goes as hand in hand with David, many things that we've dealt with in the past in our careers together. You go into a new store, and I'll do the analogy of our wireless days. You go into a new store, before you go and try and change everything, make sure you understand exactly what's not right. Right. And understand why it's not right. Because you may see something that's broken or not right, but if you see it's broken and you try and fix it without understanding why it's broken, then you could actually be exacerbating the problem and just making it worse.
Right. Well, and you can even expend leadership capital, in a poor way because they think, oh, this guy came in, tried to change everything, and he didn't even know what he's doing. He made the problem worse, right? And now you got to claw out of that situation on top of the problem you've exacerbated. So yeah, totally.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's you give yourself some time, assess things, take notes, and analyze it. Look for, why is this broken? What's wrong with this scenario? How can I fix this best? Right. And give yourself that opportunity to analyze that and then go in and start implementing those changes. So, and then if there was another one that really kind of sticks out to me that resonates in regards to, some of those similar challenges that can come up. You never have enough cash. Whether you start a business or you buy a business, you never have enough cash. So having the best possible plan you can for conserving capital going into an acquisition, I would just like I would say with credit, get it before you need it. If you're going to acquire a business, try and have as much access to capital as you can possibly have going in, because there's always something you can't account for. And I don't care how many times you do it. I can ask literally hundreds of people who've done acquisitions or taken over businesses, and they will all tell you it always costs more than you initially anticipate. Something comes out of the woodwork that ends up costing more than you anticipated. So don't try and do something like this on a shoestring budget, because it'll come back and bite you in the butt. And then you won't have the resources to fix it when you get stuck. And then you're like, well, we're already this far, we can't stop now, right? And then you get into that scenario, and that's a bad scenario to be in too.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay. Well, let's unpack some of those things, because there's a lot in there that you covered, but I know all of them are nuanced, right, and have their own, kind of sub aspects to them, which are worth spending some time on. So I think one of the first things you mentioned was due diligence, right? So looking at the
Yep.
numbers, maybe bringing in a third party or a firm that specializes in it. What are some of the red flags that you've seen, or again, as you've worked with coaches that have helped clients with M&A, that they've seen as some maybe interesting red flags or noteworthy things that you wouldn't have thought would come up in a due diligence process, or maybe things that kill deals? Anything that jumps out at you?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would not have thought would be a problem, but I completely appreciate now and understand why it happens the way that it does, and it actually almost happened in one of my scenarios, was when somebody goes to sell, it's often an emotional decision, and it's based on something that was triggered that created an emotional reaction that now
Yeah,
led to an emotional decision, right? Health, bad circumstance, a divorce, something like that. There was something that was often a negative scenario that created a negative emotion that created a negative decision, or at least a decision based on a negative emotion. And so through the process, like anything else, you kind of go through it, and regardless of how bad a scenario could be, there's very common a scenario, a situation where throughout the process, you're like, well, I don't know what is coming.
yeah,
And at least as bad as it is, I know what I have now.
right,
So maybe I should just stay the course and keep doing what I was doing, and maybe it'll get better.
yeah,
And so all of a sudden now you get a retrenching. So somebody who came forward and said, yeah, I want to sell. And then you start, as a purchaser, you start moving through that process to buy the business. And both for the coach and for the person buying the business, they're all in, right? They're like, we're
yeah.
ready to do this. We're all excited about it. And then all of a sudden the seller comes back and says, you know what? I don't think I want to sell.
You get cold feet.
So, which is, kind of unique in that regard, because, again, it was an emotional decision. Now they kind of back off it, and the high that existed during that period of time, they're like, maybe it's not that bad. The thought of getting a job, maybe that might change my perspective.
Right.
If I've
Yeah.
been self-employed for a number of years, and all of a sudden I think about having to get a job or whatever. Or I know another thing that comes up often with see, people are a little more seasoned, right? Who've been doing some business for an extended period of time. It's an extension of who they are as people,
Right.
right?
Part of their identity. Yeah.
Yeah, part of their identity. And so that creates a problem. And that makes for a challenging negotiation, because you can't really overcome that with money.
Yeah.
Right. If somebody's put in an emotional attachment to their business, could be the employees, or how you're going to handle the employees when I sell you the business, or, you're going to change the name, right? There's all these emotional attachments to a business. And I will tell you, that is a generational thing. As a matter of fact, I was literally having this conversation with somebody last evening, and that is very much more a baby boomer and a little bit of the Gen X. But the other balance of the Gen X and the millennials, they're like, late, I'm out. Right? It's like there's far less of an emotional attachment to the
Yeah.
business. I think there's a combination of two things. One, they've learned the lessons from those that came before them, right?
Yeah.
And so they've identified, yeah, I'm okay with that. And or they came in with a little bit more business acumen, in the sense that
Mhm.
it wasn't like, this is my career. It's more like, this is something I do to make a business run.
Yeah.
And so that has less of an emotional attachment. But anyway, that seems to be a little bit of a generational thing that exists. But that attachment, an emotional attachment to the business, can be a huge trip up to transitioning a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think those are some of the big things that really kind of stick out off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you mentioned something, Eric, that I think is interesting and maybe people wouldn't necessarily think about, and that was around, like compatibility of the buyer and the seller, but specifically once you take over that business, kind of the culture clash that can happen, right? Or maybe even, personalities or egos. And so maybe let's talk about that for a minute. How do you assess that, and why is that so important as part of this, M&A process? And as a coach, how do you advise your client around that?
Yeah. So as a coach, one, identify it's going to exist, plain and simple. If there was any attachment to the business from any of the employees, owner all the
Yeah.
way down, right, to the part-time employee, if there was any attachment to the previous business owner and or the mission and vision of that business, as the acquirer, you have to know, as the coach of supporting the acquirer, you have to know and understand that going into that, that's going to have to be something that you account for and have
Right.
a plan to address. because it will exist. And the longer the business has been around, the more likely that it's going to exist in a hard way or a deep way. It'll be a deeply rooted kind of thing. And I would almost suggest that even worse yet, as an acquirer, it's very common to expect that the selling owner would stay on for some period of time to help with the transition, whether it's to transition clients or to transition its staff or just systems and processes or whatever the case may be. But the longer that the original owner stays on, that also can exacerbate that period of time because it's going to play out over time. And even if you had to replace all those people, it won't necessarily be the end of the world unless there's a lot of direct association, like in the sales organization or something like that. That can be very disruptive. But as the acquirer, you have to know going in, one, you have to have a plan for that. And then two, what are some of the things to expect from that? So I mentioned earlier briefly, I said, this is how we used to do it.
Yeah.
That would be a very common thing to experience. I experienced it when we bought our coffee shop. It took us maybe almost 9 months before we got outside of some of those references and those conversations that existed that had to take place. And again, remember, it's an emotional attachment. And so logic doesn't work in that scenario, right? So as the coach, as the acquirer, you have to realize that, logically it makes sense that you're the new owner and should be able to do whatever you want, but emotionally the employee's attached to, right? Whatever was the attachment to it, right? It could have been a way that we did something or the way we treated clients or how, something extra that we did that doesn't make sense, whatever. I don't know, but you get the idea. There's, and like for instance, in the coffee shop, one of the things that we struggled with was we had very good baristas. Yeah. And they made the drinks look phenomenal and everything like that. And it was one of the things that attracted us to the business. As awesome as that was, there was also a detriment in the sense that they were very artistic. Mm-hmm. And as artists, they weren't keen on the idea that we wanted them to upsell the client from that coffee to include a Danish or a sandwich of some sort or something like that. And consequently, they felt that was beneath them to do that. And so that was that was literally a year to try and transition out of that and really get them to embrace, like nobody wanted anything, and our experience, as a salesperson, first and foremost in my career, I was like, what do you mean they didn't want? Did you even ask? Yeah. But I think that, from you get a lot of different things. It's crazy. Some of the emotional attachments that exist, it's processes, it's certain clients that really aren't serving the business. That's another big one. We had lots of people that would just kind of hang out at the business.
Right.
And they're like, oh, but these are so-and-so. It's part of our, culture. It's who we are. Right. Well, they just hang out and they don't do anything and actually kind of drive customers away because they're kind of obnoxious. I'm like, well, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so things like that, I've even seen attachments to particular products, like so focused on this product. Well, we decided not to sell that product anymore. I actually had an employee bring the product back into the store on their own dollar. On their own dollar, they brought it back into the store to sell it. And they were keeping the profits.
Jeez. Conflict of interest much?
Just a little bit, right? That was that was an interesting one in the wireless days.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I think that they just couldn't get over the idea that it was different as the acquired, right? And the acquirer has to be patient with that, but at the same time, assertive enough that they get their new expectations established and put in place.
Yeah, I'll speak just to a minute from the perspective of an employee in an acquired company. Certainly, I know that regardless of how great I thought the new leadership was or how much they wined and dined me, there's always a part of you that feels like, when's the other shoe going to drop, right? When am I going to see their true colors? And so that's always in the back of your mind. I mean, even a year after acquisition, you're always thinking like, okay, when am I finally going to see the real and that's always in your mind too. And and go back to, like processes and things like that. There's always a bit of like, well, why are we changing stuff? You bought us because we were successful. and now you want to change the things that made us successful. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so there's a natural resistance there that, and it may not even be ego. It's just like, I just don't understand. Like, I really
Right.
don't get where you're coming from. And if you're not explaining your decisions to these longtime employees, they're going to have some natural resentment or conflict that comes from it.
And that's a comment right there that you just mentioned, right? So again, right, as the acquired, if it was successful, right, or
Yeah.
at least in our eyes it was successful, and the acquirer comes in and says, we're going to do it this way, and you don't explain it,
Yeah.
right? Not you don't necessarily have to, but understand this, depending on the culture that they came from, if that's what they were used to,
Yeah.
and you come in and you treat it a different way and be like, yeah, we don't talk about, our profit margins, or we don't talk
Right.
about the cost of our products, or we don't, like, well, that's what they're used to. So if you
Yeah.
all of a sudden come in with just know that that's a complete culture shift, and
Yep.
that's going to be very disruptive to the business.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that in and of itself. As an acquirer, you need to take that into consideration, at least understand, know that that is going to be different, and it's going to be disruptive to the
Yeah.
acquisition, through the acquisition process, because it's going to be hard to absorb that.
Yeah.
Because
No.
they're going to feel like they know what it was because they knew what it was before.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point too. I think, maybe there's, I don't know if this was your intention or not, but what I heard in that was, hey, maybe it isn't a deal killer, but you need to have a plan. You need to have a plan
Yes.
to address it,
Yep.
or maybe even a couple people in the stable that you can bring in if you lose some of the key people in the company you're acquiring, because they understand your vision, your process, whatever. But
Yep.
that's a helpful perspective to have. But at least go into it with your eyes open, realize it's a potential threat, and then have a plan to mitigate it.
Yeah. As a coach to another coach supporting somebody acquiring a business, I would encourage them to be prepared to replace everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I would not go in there with the intent to replace everybody, so don't
Yeah.
misunderstand me. But I would go in there with the, emergency
Yeah.
break the glass just in case kind of scenario where I have to replace everybody, or be prepared to run all those roles, or figure out how to manage all of that, because it's, it can all look good on the surface, and 3 weeks into it,
Yeah.
even though you're doing all the right things,
Yep.
it's again, it can be such an emotional thing that people can't wrap their heads around it.
Yeah. Well, that's such a good point too, because you go back to, you think it's a shortcut, right? It's kind of one of the main themes here is you think it's a
Yep.
shortcut, you think it's an easy path to growth, but now all of a sudden you've got, the cost of trying to recruit and hire, dozens of people, or the lost productivity, right? You lose a whole sales team because they don't like your new process and they all just walk. Well, you're screwed, not only in the short term until you hire those people, but to get them trained up back to the same level of proficiency. Were you planning on that cash flow hit? Were you, all those sorts of things
Yeah.
come into play, and you got to think through that, have that plan. So that's great advice.
Yeah.
It's like you've been
Well,
there.
say again.
It's like you've been there and you've done it.
Yeah, maybe just a few times. Well, I mean, things like, even like compensation, right? You go into them, it's very common for somebody to acquire a business saying, "Oh, we're going to pay less, or we're going to pay more."
Yeah.
Well, or we're going to pay a commission, like before they were salary, and we're going to do some kind of commission or bonus structure. All of those things that are different than what people were accustomed to, and employees can be really different
Yeah.
at times, right? They're entrenched in the way things were, and often the reason that employees stay employees is because they're afraid of, or at least uncomfortable with, change.
Yeah.
And by being an employee, they can reduce the amount of change they're exposed to, theoretically.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas, being an entrepreneur, you realize that it's all about change. And to the degree that it's productive and beneficial, but that you have to be willing to adapt. And often employees are much slower to adapt than the entrepreneur is, for certain.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. No, that's human nature, right? We resist
Yep.
change. So good point. Um, I'm curious too, right? So you're going through due diligence. You're thinking about culture fit. One of the things that I think any buyer is interested in, but also seller too, is you want a good deal, you want a fair price, you want a good valuation. So,
Yep.
any thoughts or perspectives on a coach that's advising a client around that fair valuation, especially maybe from the buyer's perspective?
Yeah. So representing a buyer, well, and if you're a coach representing a seller, it can be very similar. But one, don't be cheap. Pay for an evaluation.
Yeah.
I mean, and I say that again, we're talking about a business that's doing $1 million, 2, 3, 4, 5 million in top line revenue. A couple 100,000, probably not necessary, right? It's going to be some multiple of the EBITDA. But the multiple of the EBITDA, I've seen businesses sell for a half of EBITDA, a half a year's EBITDA, right? So if it's doing 100,000 a year, I've seen a business sell that's making $100,000 a year sell for $50,000.
Yeah.
I've also seen that same business sell for $500,000.
Hmm.
I saw a business that actually was barely making $30,000 a year sell for $150,000.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the reason being is the acquirer, first of all, had the cash. Second of all, wasn't familiar with the industry, but the one thing that they acquired the company had was a pretty significant database.
Mm.
And so what the acquirer saw was, ooh, you have tens of thousands of people in your database.
Yeah.
Right? Not necessarily paying customers, but you have tens of thousands of people in your database. I can leverage that to make the business what I want to make it. And it took them longer, but they had the long-term strategy, and it played out over the course of probably closer to 3 years. But they were willing to overpay, and they like I said, they paid 5 times what I said. I said that the best price they would get was going to be $50,000. I said that was the no. I'm sorry, I take that back. I said the likely price was going to be $50,000 on the high end, 100,000, and I said, and maybe just maybe somebody pays 125 to 150,000 if they really see the long term value.
Yeah,
and they got 150,000, which I was completely surprised with because I wouldn't have paid that.
Nice.
But yeah, as far as helping people through that process, there's a lot that goes into the valuation and getting a good deal. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to overpay if you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
If you truly understand what you're getting, you've done adequate due diligence. You understand the people that are coming with it or the systems that are coming with it, and you truly understand the value of the assets you're acquiring, and you can see the potential. Don't be afraid to overpay, especially if you can get better terms. As a matter of fact, one of the things I would say as it relates to an acquisition, the terms are probably more important than the price. Matter of fact, I will say 100% certain terms are going to be more important than the price.
Can you break that down a little bit for us for those that are familiar?
Yeah. So for instance, if I'm buying a business for $500,000 and the owner is willing to finance it over 10 years at $50,000 a year, I'd be willing to pay $750,000 for it at that point. I'm paying $75,000 a year over the course of a $500,000 business. I'd be willing to pay up to $750,000 if you give me 10 years to pay it off.
Yeah.
Now you may say, well, why would the owner want to do that? Why would the person who's selling want to do that? Well, maybe it's a tax situation.
Yeah. Right.
The taxes on $75,000 a year is nothing compared to the taxes on $500,000 in one lump sum.
Right.
Right. Because they're broken down over an extended period of time. You probably have other things to factor into that scenario. And so that seller may have a good reason to do that.
Yeah.
Now they may also have the angst of not getting paid, which is a legitimate concern as well. Right. But there's things that you could do to offset that. But terms are definitely more important. So how long I have, what interest rate I pay, be willing to pay more over a period of time, because one thing you can't ever account for, no matter how much you try, and I say with 100% certainty, let's say that you can't account for with 100% certainty how much the business may drop off when you acquire it.
Right.
Right. You can do all the due diligence, you can have all the systems in place, you can keep everything exactly the same, but something is different.
Yeah.
Right. I don't even know how to put my thumb on what that might be. I'm just saying, but you can never account for how much the business owner played a role in that business, right? Or some key employee for that matter. It's just really hard to gauge. But if somebody sells and your business drops off 20%, right, that whatever valuation you came up with is not right anymore.
Yeah.
And so it can be very, very challenging to determine a price point. And it's subjective. That's the other thing I think is really important to remember for everybody in this scenario, the price is subjective. It's not nearly as cut and dry as like a real estate purchase of a home would be, which is for most people buying a business, the closest that they can come to understanding the concept of buying a business is the first home or a home purchase.
Yeah.
Because it's comparable often in the price point, whether it's a couple $100,000, $1 million, a few $1 million, whatever. It's comparable to buying a house in that regard. The difference is in buying a home, the valuation is pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
Right. There's this thing called MLS. It has all the houses in the United States, or at least most of them anyway. And even the bank won't loan the money unless it's comparable to the other houses in valuation for what's, in that general area, even that community, the neighborhood or whatever. Whereas in the business space, you could have one software as a sales company here sell for 3x multiple, and you can have another one sell for 10x multiple.
Right.
Because the acquirer of that business that a 10x multiple, they look at that and say, "Oh, we see how this plugs into our existing business, and this accelerates our business. We're willing to pay whatever to get it."
Yeah, almost the Wild West, really, when it comes to pricing and valuation. Yeah,
it can be. Yeah, it can be. And you never truly identify the acquirer's ultimate, goal for the acquisition.
right.
Generally, it's like the same thing with the seller for that matter. I mean, the seller says, "Well, it's a health issue. I want to retire," or whatever. Sometimes it's just boredom.
Yeah.
I've seen business owners who just want to sell. They're just done with their business. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I did this for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. It was cool, but it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
But
I don't want to do it.
There's a guy that we both know that he sold one of his learning software companies, and he took a year and a half off to do pickles. I mean, that was his. He started a pickle brand. He just really liked pickles, wanted to get into it, and he started, making pickles, and that's what he did. And then he got bored of that, and then got back and started another business. But you never know, right?
Exactly. And no matter what they tell you, it's usually not what they tell you.
Right.
Their real rationale, right? Your real rationale for acquiring that business, it may be to take over that business. It may be to scale that business. It could be you're bored, right? I don't know, but there is, well, you probably don't buy a business if you're bored, but you get the idea. I mean, the purpose of our acquisition, I've seen a scenario where a company bought a tortilla manufacturing company in Mexico.
Hmm.
They weren't in the tortilla space. They're in the software space.
Hmm.
And you're like, why in the world are they buying a tortilla company? Well, the tortilla company in Mexico was on 100 acres of land.
Yeah, there you go.
So, and if you had a facility, if you had that much space and you could buy a building and open let's say some kind of manufacturing facility.
Yeah.
Right. It was manufacturing. So it must have been hardware, not software, but they bought the business in Mexico because they built a building, had a production facility on the land, kept the tortilla place in place, and continued to get revenue from it.
Yeah.
But they 10x'd the value.
Wow.
Because what they wanted was the 100-year lease on the land that they could get access to and build the land and build it in Mexico where the cost of labor was substantially cheaper.
Yeah.
So, but that never came out through the due diligence process.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
Because it's like, you're like, oh, you're going to offer me 10 times what I thought it was worth? Yeah, sure. No problem.
Yeah.
But I say 10, it was 10x. And I think they were looking for a 4 multiple and they got a 10 multiple.
Okay.
So 2.5 times the valuation. But I mean, that was like, who would say no to that at that point? Right.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I almost don't even care why you're buying it.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe the person that sold it went and started a different tortilla company. Who knows?
Exactly.
The transferable skill set, get a smaller factory and start over. But,
yeah. I got all kinds of money to start a new business.
Yeah. More than I thought. So great.
So cool. So there's a lot that goes into valuation and determining valuation. That's why it's so important to do good due diligence, to make the investment into the people that can help you identify that, pay for a valuation if it makes sense. And I won't say it always makes sense, but it definitely, once you get north of $1 million plus in top line revenue, or you get a multiple of millions, you absolutely need to be paying for it. At minimum, you can get it it won't be a SEPA certified valuation, but you can get a valuation of a business. We have a solution for $1,000. We can have somebody give you a high level valuation so that you can at least know, based on the appropriate, at least the outline of an appropriate valuation process, that it's within line, right, for what you're either buying or selling the business for. And in doing so, then at least you have the confidence going in, knowing that you didn't miss something.
Right. Yeah.
Right. At least from a valuation perspective. Now, that's not your due diligence. That's just something separate. But the point is, don't be afraid to do that. And if you're selling, all the more reason, if you're a coach helping somebody sell, encourage them to do that, because more often than not, what they believe the business is worth and what the business is actually worth is usually pretty stark comparison as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, good thoughts there. We've talked a bit about some of the post-acquisition integration, some of the challenges you run into, but any other thoughts on that before we maybe talk about how M&A aligns to kind of overall long-term strategy?
Yeah. So I would say that like I said, I mentioned it, I would say it again, because I believe it's really valuable. Don't go in thinking you're going to make changes right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Not that you can't, but I would highly encourage somebody assess what's going on first before you go in and try and make a bunch of changes. And allow yourself the opportunity to really embrace and understand the business the way it was designed. That way, when you make adjustments, they can be more strategic.
Yeah.
Right. You can be aligned with the people as opposed to coming in saying, this is how we're going to do it. You can get aligned with them and say, hey, I've noticed this isn't exactly the way we'd like it to be. How can we make it more like that? And really get buy-in from the team.
Yep.
That takes a certain level of emotional intelligence that may or may not be obvious to the acquirer, but I think that if you came in with that approach, your likelihood of success is much higher. I would say from personal experience, I know that would be much higher. In addition to that, I would say that as with anything, this is actually just coming to me as I'm thinking through it, but know what your exit strategy is.
Yeah.
Even as an acquirer, right? Obviously, as you're selling, you get a plan what you're going to do after you sell. But as an acquirer, what's your exit strategy going in? You're going through this process to acquire this business. Are you planning on flipping it? Are you planning on buy and hold it for long-term cash flow? Are you planning on buying it so you can incorporate it with another similar business, or whatever the case may be? But have a strategy for it. I think that too many people not only acquire, but just even start businesses and don't really have a strategy for it longer term. What does it look like? And even if you don't do what you said you're going to do in 5 years and it takes 10 years to do it, so be it.
Yeah.
But at least have a plan working towards it, because what we've identified, 76% of businesses that are successful into the long term are successful because they had a long-term strategy.
Right.
They had a long-term strategy that involved growth to some degree. It doesn't have to be super big growth, but it had some strategic growth structure built into it. And we'll add a truck a year for 10 years or whatever that looks like. But the idea is that when you do that, you have some long-term vision. It also helps from an employee perspective. Matter of fact, I just did an article on this today, a post on this today on LinkedIn, just talking about what the success of a company long-term is enhanced dramatically by somebody who actually goes in with a long-term vision versus a small-term vision, right? You go with a small-term vision. How hard is it to retain good quality people if they don't see anywhere where this is going?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. This is David Macon's business and davidmacon.com doing his thing and selling whatever he's selling. And you bring in some good top quality talent because they believe in what you're doing, but then realize you're never going to let go of the reins. You're never going to move on. You're never going to grow to the point where they can grow and actually have new opportunities. You're not going to retain good quality staff. You're going to be constantly replaying, which is why often small business owners struggle with recruiting good talent.
Right.
Because they don't have a big enough vision to bring in the kind of people that will want to work with them.
Yeah. No, great point.
So as an acquisition, I think that's important. And I think, honestly, one of the things that I've thrived at when I've gone into new opportunities is being able to paint a new vision and say, hey, this is where we're going and I want you to be a part of it. And I see you playing, David, a really integral role in our success and moving forward. And because I'm able to do that, I get typically better success in an acquisition.
Right. Absolutely.
But that takes time and experience.
Yeah. And experience often comes from doing it the wrong way or the hard
Wrong
way.
way.
Yeah. Nice. Well, cool. Well, we covered a lot of ground today on this topic. Anything else that you want to add around, advising clients or helping coaches that are advising clients around M&A?
Yeah. What I would say to a coach is, if you haven't been down that path, do some due diligence, even if it's just educational, watch some YouTube videos, learn from somebody who's done it, get some perspective on this, because if you listen to some of the people that do this on a regular basis, you'll learn lessons from that group of people that do this on a regular basis, acquisitions and sales. And you'll learn some of those trials and tribulations. You'll see the tripping moments that come up. You'll see the different types of, we talked a lot about cultural fits. One of the things that I've seen play out is when the acquirer and the acquired don't connect.
Yeah.
Like, they just literally like, no, you're a jerk, I don't like you, and I'm not going to sell you my business. I've literally seen that happen.
Yeah.
I've also seen others. They're like, I don't care, take it. It's free. I don't want it anymore. It's like, I've seen like complete opposite. And then the worst part was, the person acquired the business. They're like, this is great. This is so easy, and everything was fine. They got into the business and all the employees quit because they're like, oh no, this guy actually wants to work.
Yeah. We're getting away with so much.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I think that a good piece for a coach would be, if you haven't done it and you want to get into the exit strategy space, or you want to get into the acquisition space with your clients, or you want to play in that space, you do need to do some due diligence of your own as a coach and get experience to it. And you can get some of that. Not certainly wouldn't be good to do all of it that way, but at least some of it through just reading. Reading some of these assessments, listening to some people that do these deals, and listening to the stories and the challenges that they go through. Because you learn as much from somebody else's bad experience as you do from your own. Maybe not as much, but a lot. And certainly you can help buffer against those types of analysis at those scenarios. And I think the added piece to that is, if you can think far enough down the pipeline, when you hear a story about something and you can make it relatable to that business or that industry, you can see other things that might play out similarly.
Right. Yeah. No, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's really important and then if you're somebody who's considering buying a business, I would highly recommend working with somebody else, as I mentioned earlier, because whether it's the financial analysis, the legal analysis, right? Bringing in, talking to a lawyer is something that's probably worthy of consideration. Even just the lease negotiation. That you don't want to don't be the entrepreneur that tries to do everything on their own, to do it on the cheap to save a few bucks, because that's usually when you make a big mistake. It ends up costing you a lot more money than it would have cost for a few $1,000s for a lawyer or an accountant or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah.
And as a coach, you need to have that same mentality. Don't try and do something that you're not familiar with. Advise and coach and counsel, and then put them in the room with the right professional if that's the appropriate thing to do for that particular part of the transaction.
Makes sense. Well, as you touch on that, Eric, it reminds me of, you may be a coach right now, and this is not an area of expertise that you have, or, maybe you'd love to work with partners that specialize in due diligence or the legal side of, business law and that sort of thing. But you don't have that network. That's really a big reason why Eric created My Biz Coaches, is to bring coaches together, leverage different strengths and expertise, and then build a partner network that they can leverage for things like M&A. And so if you're a coach and you're kind of tired of the lone wolf act, or you want to have those partnerships kind of already pre-built and have somebody that can guide you through it, definitely encourage you to check out My Biz Coaches. Really easy. You can scan the QR code, learn more about becoming a coach, or you can go to mybizcoaches.co/coach and learn more as well. And even if you're not a business coach and maybe you've thought about it, or you're a professional that serves small businesses and think, well, hey, I'm already talking to business owners, maybe I could include some coaching along with it. Eric would love to talk with you too. It doesn't cost you anything to talk with Eric, and he does love to talk, so he wouldn't mind at all. and see if it might be a fit with what you're trying to do and what your goals and objectives are, and see if it aligns with what he's doing over at My Biz Coaches. So With that in mind, Eric, you got a lot going on at My Biz Coaches. You've got some exciting new partnerships that you're always working on. Anything that you want to highlight that's maybe new and happening over at My Biz Coaches before we wrap up today?
Yeah, so we have a new extension of our business that we're working on. It's called Bankable Business Strategies. And Bankable Business Strategies is a financial business credit and finance education division that we've created. It's actually a separate entity that we partnered with, and I'm an owner of. And in that model, what we're doing is we're helping business owners identify how to establish business credit, ideally, ultimately corporate credit, and get access to capital, whether that's through loans, lines of credit, business credit cards, whatever it might be. But we help them identify the path that they should take, the things that they need to do to make them bankable, which is a term we use, and basically means that they are fundable, would be another one that you may have heard before, but meaning that as a business, they're qualified to get credit, right? Like just like we do as on a personal level, we're trying to get credit. At Bankable Business Strategy, we're teaching businesses how to become bankable or fundable, and so that they can get access to credit and leverage that to create opportunity for growth or deal with short-term cash flow scenarios or whatever the case may be. But there's hundreds of strategies that exist, and you have to make sure that you kind of follow this process. And there's a lot of really basic, simple things that I include in the posts that I put out there on this category of information. But we talk about it openly. For instance, take a quick example. If you have a email address that is a Gmail or a Hotmail or whatever some of the other emails that are out there, and it's not your domain, right? That right there will likely get you denied for a bank loan. If you don't have a website, or there's inconsistencies between the information you put on an application and your website, that'll likely get you an immediate denial. So it's things like that a lot of people don't even know, and this is even more important today than it ever was before. Because in the old days, you go to the banker and the banker would help you prepare and do all that kind of stuff. Everything's done with algorithms now.
Yeah.
So they put the paperwork in, computer spits it out and says denied, approved, maybe, go do a little bit more due diligence. But there's so many things that'll immediately kick it out and say denied. Now, sometimes you can go back and do that, but there's a lot of heartache and a lot of frustration that comes with that. Our process, we educate you, we prepare you, and we make you bankable so that when you go and actually ask for the credit, I can't guarantee that you're going to get the credit, but it improves your odds dramatically. It certainly makes sure that you know the things you need to know before you go in there, and it helps you identify what you may need to do before you try and run for this business credit or get this credit. And then ultimately, we have a strategy for you. We work with you for a year and help ensure that you not only get business credit at some point, but in addition to that, then we also help create a strategy for you to go to corporate credit, where you use your EIN. You get what we call non-recourse loans, which are loans that you're not personally financially responsible for. And we educate you on all of the components of that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it's a good extension. Where's the best places for them to learn more about that? Just connect with you on LinkedIn for now.
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can actually go to bankablebusinessstrategies.com.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Awesome.
Yep.
I'll put that in the show notes to make sure people have it.
Perfect.
Very cool. Well, Eric, appreciate the insights as always. And again, quick reminder, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show. Lots of great advice just like this with Eric every single week, so you don't want to miss out. And until next time, we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, David.